right. Thank you all for being here today. We really appreciate your taking the time to come and listen. This is a little bit of an unusual bill, and I first will just explain why I'm even involved. My background is in human rights. I'm a mom, but my previous experiences as a human rights officer, I've always had an interest in the most vulnerable, the oppressed, and how government and ideology interact with those children and women. That was my background in Romania as human rights officer shortly after totalitarianism fell. And then I worked for a number of years on the Hill on international human rights issues. My husband and I co-wrote the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998. I was a Democrat in the House. He was a Republican in the Senate. And we ended up getting married. And I mention that because this is that kind of issue. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember Barney Frank and Jesse Helms, but we used to get them on the same letters because nobody wants to see people hurt for their beliefs, for their identity, for anything. And so this is really that kind of bill that we have today. This is about parents. The first person that I talked to, one of the first people I talked to about Michelle's situation, and I would say first, Michelle is a friend more than anything else, but she's courageously telling her story today here. And the first person who talked to me about her, in part, was a mom who is in California. She's never voted Republican in her life, but when she read her story, she cried and cried because she said that could have been my kid. And she has friends whose kids that is. So what we're talking about today is an issue that affects parents of all stripes, all beliefs, all backgrounds. And so I'm going to ask you, if you would, just to take off the labels. Stop being a Republican, a Democrat, a Libertarian, whatever y'all are, and just listen with your heart, because this is really, first and foremost, about protecting children. It's about people who might differ on everything else, but we are fiercely, fiercely devoted to protecting our kids. So I will introduce Michelle to you. She has a long history of caring about kids with trauma. She's actually a court-appointed special advocate, and so she has a lot of experience. She had to have a background check, have trauma training, a lot of different things that go into that. So she just has a huge heart. And if you remember anything about her, remember her as the mom who never quit. This is the mom you want in your corner if something goes wrong. So without further ado, my friend Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And actually, we just call ourselves CASAs, which is a voluntary position, and we help kids stuck in the foster care system. All right, so here we go. The following is the story of Sage. I'm her mother, better known as Nana. I adopted Sage when she was almost 2 years old. She is my son's daughter. My son passed away when Sage was 6 months old. It took more than a year to adopt her, and she was shuffled from one foster home to another, 6 foster homes in all. But finally, I was able to bring her home. Her first day home, I found out part of what trauma does to a baby. This little tiny baby never cried. Sage laid in her crib, sucking her fingers in silence. She had been taught that when she cries, nobody would listen, nobody cared. My heart ached for this innocent baby, and we so loved her. And we rocked her, and we sang to her. And we had tea parties with her, with fancy hats and fancy dresses. And she blossomed. She came joyful and lively, a bright-eyed little girl, full of love and curiosity. And we lived for her hugs and kisses. Love conquered all, until the day our beautiful, innocent daughter turned 13. We never, ever imagined the horror and the pain that would soon come our way. And I'm here because I want the world to know that I'm not alone. What happens to vulnerable trans-identified children like my daughter. This is a true story that no child should have to live, and certainly not one who already had more than her fair share of pain, as did Sage. Sage started going through puberty in 8th grade, and to that point, she was a straight-A student. She loved poetry, she could play the piano, she loved to read. But her mental health began to weaken, and her psychiatrist placed her on medication for her depression and anxiety. At her small school in Lynchburg, the teachers would work with me and with the doctor if they noticed concerns about her behavior, which they did, and we would adjust her medication. And then COVID hit. Sage's mental health, along with all the other kids, deteriorated under the lockdowns in the same way all the other kids did. When COVID let up, Sage began 9th grade at Appomattox High School. She came home and informed me that all the kids were bi and trans and emo and gay and goth. And at some point, the social influence overcame her. She started dressing in boys' clothes, but she was telling me she was emo. And I let her dress that way because I'm a Cossack. Kids go through changes, just like when she was little. They all want to dress up and be somebody they're not, and it was perfectly normal to me. Actually, my husband dyed her hair blue when she wanted it blue. But she was telling the school a different thing. She advised her friends and teachers that she wanted to be trans and that Sage would no longer be her name. She requested to be called Draco and referred to as a boy. Sage requested the school not to tell me, and the school obliged, even though I had submitted the information as when a child goes to school that she had mental health issues, she was on medication, and she had been inpatient just the month before for depression. I also had informed them, so why they didn't tell me, or at least request a parents' meeting to this day is like just way beyond my understanding. This school made a very poor decision that was not in my child's best interest, and it was at the cost of my daughter's mental health. They failed not only Sage, but me. I'm her legal mother. I was left in the dark. I wish I had known, because if I had known, this would have been a much, much different story. Sadly, Sage was bullied and became extremely vulnerable. I didn't know how bad it was until later, but eventually she told me, the boys are following me, they're touching me, they're shoving me, they're threatening me with rape and violence. And then something happened in the boys' bathroom on Monday, August 23rd. And even though the school had reports flying in from students and teachers about her being in the boys' bathroom, and the school had reviewed hallway footage and seen several boys inside while she was there, I was never informed. Nobody told me. The school did not inform me that there was an issue until 2 days later, on Wednesday, August 25th. They called me to come pick Sage up because she was distraught. That evening, I found a hall pass with a boy's name on it, Draco, and she told me she was identifying as a boy at school, and that she had been told by the counselor her very first week of school that she could use the boys' bathroom. She told me that on Monday she had been jacked up against the wall by a group of boys in the boys' bathroom and threatened with violence. Later I learned there was a rape too. She was trying to hold back tears, just like when she was a baby, and she was terrified of the threats. I told her she could stay home from school and we would figure out what to do. That was the last time I had a conversation with Sage for the next 344 days. She disappeared later that night, and there was a note left for me and Roger, my husband, that she was scared of what would happen if she stayed, and that we should be careful, that there's bad people out there. She actually thought she was meeting, I guess the counselor gave her transgender sites, and she thought she was meeting a 16-year-old kid to go skateboarding, and it turned out to be a sex trafficker who groomed her online. The sheriff was notified and the FBI was called. The search and rescue dogs called in, and that's when my heart stopped. I couldn't breathe. They were looking for her body. I dropped to my knees in prayer, and 9 days later, the FBI found her in Baltimore, Maryland. She had survived cruel, abusive rapes, lost her virginity to multiple vile men, and then taken to D.C. in Maryland, and these men drugged and raped her and transported her to live with their family. That's a code word for sex traffickers, to let the guy know that they're seasoning a new kid. Psychological manipulation, gang rape, sexual beatings, deprivation of food, sleep, isolation from friends, family. It's actually designed to break down a victim's resistance and ensure compliance. Learned that in CASA school. She was locked in a room where men came in to rape her. The FBI rescued her on September 2nd, 2021 at 10 o'clock at night. Nothing short of a miracle. The agent called, requested me to pick our daughter up first thing in the morning at Waxter's Detention Center for Girls in Catonsville, Maryland. We stayed up all night packing the car with blankets and pillows, her favorite stuffed animals. We left early and were waiting at the door of the girls' jail by 8 a.m. She had been in the hospital most of the night for a 5-hour rape exam. My husband and I knocked on the jail door at 9 in the morning. A window on the door opened. I quickly told her, "We're here to pick up our 14-year-old daughter, Sage Lily Blair." The woman was cold. She advised us that Sage would not be released until we saw a judge at 4 in the afternoon. Why? She didn't tell me. Can we see her? No. Can I give her a hug? No. Can we call her? No. We found out that they didn't even tell her I was there waiting for her, praying for answers. My husband and I sit in the car for 7 hours in front of the courthouse until 4 o'clock, hoping to get a glimpse of our Sage. We enter the courtroom. Sage comes up on a huge Zoom screen. She looks tiny and broken, and I cry out, "I love you, Sage." Sage says, "I love you too, Nana." The public defender, Anissa Khan, quickly takes over and points the finger at us for calling her Sage. She is a he, and his name is Draco, not Sage. We're floored. What? The attorney proceeds to advise the judge that we are emotionally and physically abusive parents and that we aren't using the right name and pronouns, even though we didn't know until the night she disappeared that she was claiming to be trans. We were willing to use any name and pronouns. I just wanted her out of Maryland and back home to Virginia. But my husband, he's 73, he was overcome with tears. He kept forgetting. So the judge got so upset and exasperated, he had the bailiff take him out of the courtroom. And I'm crying and pleading for my daughter to be sent home so she can receive treatment for the trauma she endured. Judge Kershaw told me if I said trauma one more time, he would throw me out too. I remember. So we had to leave without her, and for more than 2 months, he held hearings where Attorney Khan tried to prove we were abusive. They even brought in school counselors to testify against us, even though they didn't even know Sage. Avery had only had 2 20-minute meetings with her. The judge put our precious child, who had survived abuse, a lot of adults don't, in prison, like a delinquent. He moved her to a children's home according to her male identity, and she later told me she was the only girl and was assaulted there too. The only girl. I mean, it defies common sense. Why would you put a teenage girl's body in a men's home with teenage, boys' home with teenage? Anyway, she was exposed to street drugs. She was told, her attorney told her she didn't care about the drugs. She only cared about winning the case. She wanted it to go to appeals and then to the Supreme Court. Sage also told me later that none of the cards and the letters I wrote ever reached her. I was never allowed to talk to her. Attorney Khan told Sage I didn't want her anymore and would win her case and put her in a foster home in Maryland. And my child had no way of knowing I was fighting so hard to get her back. Finally, the judge had to award custody. We were cleared of all the abuse charges by 2 states, by Maryland and Virginia. Sage thought I didn't want her, and she was afraid of being placed in a locked facility because I wanted her in Youth for Tomorrow, an outdoor, and they specifically had a place for sexually exploited teenage girls. And Khan wouldn't allow it, and the court negotiated because it would affirm her, because they had to call her by Draco. And we couldn't find a place that would do that except where she went. And another adult fails her math teacher. She tells her math teacher she's going to run away. The math teacher gives her a backpack and says, "Okay, here, keep it in the closet here and come after school to get it." Doesn't tell anybody. So she ran right into the clutches of another trafficker, this time all the way to Texas, and she disappeared for months. This was, again, another guy that had talked to her online saying he was 16. They were telling me that she might have already gotten trafficked out of the country, but I just kept looking everywhere I could on her social media. I got into her social media, and I finally found a tip that led the Texas Marshals to her. Finally, for the first time in 5 months, my daughter and I could talk, and she started sharing with me. The only facility that Maryland would allow due to her trans identity, this mother wanted her in Youth for Tomorrow. Did I skip a page? A unit dedicated for sexually exploited girls at Youth for Tomorrow. But because of the court's insistence, Sage would be locked up in a facility with high-risk kids. There, her therapist glorified her male identity. She was encouraged to have her healthy breasts removed. I was beside myself. And she would soon be 16, and I knew that was next. And finally, a young lawyer took pity on me, Josh Hetzler. We love you, man. From Founding Freedoms in Richmond, took pity on me. He and his team assisted in helping me get Sage discharged against medical advice. Thank you, Lord, because Sage wanted to be a girl, secretly. She was afraid to tell the doctors at North Spring. She made me promise not to tell them, and that's when I knew something was horribly wrong, because I had gone for I drive 4 hours up and 4 hours back every Saturday, and I get to take her for 2 hours. And she wanted me to buy her girl clothes, and she wanted a bra. But when I brought her back to the facility, she said, please don't tell anyone. And that's when that was like a red flag. What? Well, Sage is currently receiving trauma care with a team of people that finally do have her best interest at heart. Sage has been gone from home 344 days. The first trial has taken place, and the first of several vile men is convicted. The guy's in jail. The next two are soon to follow out of D.C. Sage is taking baby steps towards her recovery, trying to cope with nightmares, night terrors, panic attacks, depression, anxiety. Last night she woke up. I was up with her at 11:30. Sage also has a lifetime sentence of PTSD. Sage also suffers with medical issues due to the rapes, but she's alive, and there is hope. I tell her she's not broken, she's just scarred. She hopes that her story will help save the lives of other children. Sage does not want any more children to have to suffer through the consequences that she survived. Sage does have a heart of compassion. That everyone was doing, she said, Nana, everyone was doing the transgender thing, and she only wanted a friend. My heart breaks for this resilient young girl. And parents, you are not alone. This mother stands with you. We love our children more than any counselor, judge, or teacher. They have no business teaching our children what gender they are, and certainly no business teaching them to keep secrets from their parents. Let us parents do our job. We know our children better than you do, and we love our children. Thanks, guys. I appreciate your time.
So thank you all for listening. I think I'm going to introduce now, Delegate LaRock, because he's going to say a few words. As I mentioned, my background is in policy and human rights, and that means documenting things. That means figuring out where the policies are and the inflections of failure in policies. And I think it's very, very clear what the policy inflections were in Sage's story. The institutions that were designed to protect her put her in danger instead. And I am sure that no one intended that outcome, but that horrific outcome was a direct result of some of these policies. And when you leave parents out of a child's life, you take out their greatest protection. And you leave the door open to predators. You don't know who's going to walk through that door. And in Sage's case, the worst possible outcome happened because that door was left open. So parental exclusion policies are a door wide open to predators. And I don't care if you are a Democrat or a Republican or anything in between, if you don't consider this bill a step in the right direction toward protecting children, then you are leaving that door open. And it's time to lock that door, to take a step towards locking it. So, and I will say one other thing, that for a long, long time, Michelle was very alone. She couldn't even get anybody to take her case. The judge kept reprimanding her for not having counsel. She tried and tried and tried. She tried to mortgage her home so she could pay counsel. She couldn't get anybody to take this case because it was complicated and it was a political hot button, until Josh stepped in. So I will say she was alone for a long time. She's not alone anymore. She's got mama bears at her back from California to Florida, and we have her back and we are supporting her. And there are a lot of others that are in the mix. And first of those, I'm going to mention Delegate LaRock, who has a long history of standing for parents and kids.
Thank you. Well, thanks again for being here. I'll be brief. We have a handout here that will outline a summary of the law. Has that been passed around yet, Daniel? Good. Okay. Well, I don't need to explain the law. It's actually very simple. I'll just add my remarks. After hearing Michelle tell us in great detail what went wrong, I hope we in the legislature can agree that no child should ever experience what Michelle has experienced. It's horrific. If you look at the bill, we are dealing with sensitive material, respecting viewpoints that may differ from my own, perhaps of Michelle's, and trying to create some relief and respect parental rights at a fundamental level, and do so by incorporating the four changes that you'll see in this outline. Rights of parents, a parent has a fundamental right to make decisions concerning the upbringing, education, and care of the parent's child. That's not my opinion. That's Virginia law. I'm citing Section 1-240.1. I don't believe the systems that dealt with SAGE properly administered that law. So we'd like to change it so that the law reflects what is already in Virginia law. Subjective determinations of whether a family's beliefs are abuse and neglect are not acceptable. Virginia laws need to be absolutely clear that affirming a child's biological sex does not justify taking a child away from the family. Again, no child should experience what SAGE has, and again, I hope the legislature will come to an agreement on how to protect children, parents, and their rights in the future. And I'm grateful to this team for allowing me to be part of the effort to make that come about. Thank you.
So a quick word to introduce Josh. I think most of you probably know him, but he is the first one who stepped in to help Michelle when she wasn't sure how to get Sage out of the treatment facility, but Sage was secretly telling her, Mom, I don't want to be doing this. So Josh has worked with Delegate LaRock and worked with us to craft the policy and many other things. So here he is.
Well, good morning. As was said, I'm Josh Hetzler, legal counsel for Founding Freedoms Law Center, which is the legal division of the Family Foundation. I have had the honor of getting to know Michelle and Sage over the past year after Michelle reached out to our law center for help. As I became more familiar with all that had happened to Sage and her parents, it became very clear that there were significant problems in our government institutions that allowed all of this to happen when none of it had to happen. When we got involved, Sage was in a facility several hours from her parents that was actively influencing her to identify as male, against her parents' wishes and ultimately against Sage's own wishes, though she felt afraid to tell the facility staff she wanted to be a girl. We stepped in to figure out a way to bring Sage home where she belonged, after being kept from her parents for over a year. Thankfully, we were able to do that, and Sage is finally getting the healing she needs with the love and support of her parents, family, and church. It cannot be overlooked that much of what happened in Sage's school came after former Governor Northam's administration's model policies for transgender students took effect. The Founding Freedoms Law Center tried to stop them from being implemented by suing the Department of Education through an Administrative Process Act lawsuit. Unfortunately, we were told that neither we nor the plaintiffs' parents had standing to challenge them. We adamantly warned that this sort of harm would happen, only to be ignored. Now Sage's story, though one of the more dramatic examples, is representative of the ways children are at risk of being harmed all across Virginia, and their parents are being shut out of critical life decisions. Sage's law was born out of the necessity to help ensure that this never happens again to any child or parents in Virginia. We are grateful to Delegate LaRock for his efforts to prevent this from happening in the future. and especially to Sage and her parents for their bravery by being willing to tell their story so that no one will ever have to go through what they have. We are actively exploring all legal remedies in her case, but are convinced that a legislative solution is also necessary. So we implore the General Assembly to pass Delegate LaRocque's bill, which is House Bill 2432. Thank you.
Our one last person to introduce you to, one more ally, is Elaine Jarvis, and she is speaking for the Gavel Project. She is representing Michelle in a number of different matters, and she's going to say just a word.
Hi, thank you for having us here. Again, my name is Elaine Jarvis, and I am here on behalf of the Gavel Project. The leader of the Gavel Project, Ryan Heath, reached out to me several months ago to see if I was interested in this case. And as a counselor at law and as a mother, I am and I was. I have had the honor of getting to know Sage and Michelle. I have also had the honor to getting to know all of our allies in this matter. Once again, we're very grateful to the Gavel Project. This, in so many respects, is just such a common sense thing. I'm a mom, and if one of my children wants to go on a field trip, the school comes to me for my consent. But if the schools want to change my child's pronouns, not only do I not get to consent, I don't receive notification. That is the gist of why we're here. And again, thank you very much for having us. Thank you to the Gavel Project. Thank all of you.
So I just want to wrap up by saying you heard Sage's story here today and Michelle's, but really that was the story of parents all across the U.S. Sage has courageously given her name to this law. Michelle has courageously put herself out there to tell the story. But Michelle has heard from countless parents who contacted her when some heard word of her story on some of the parent websites. This is the story of parents all across the U.S. This is happening in states, it's happening in schools, it's happening in courtrooms. And it's not because it's in the best interest of the child, it's because activists are blinded by their ideological beliefs to what's actually in the interests of the child. So we're here to say that no matter what your beliefs are, no matter whether your child is trans or not, we probably all know and love people who have trans kids or trans kids themselves that we know. I know I do, some whom I love very, very much. It's not about that. It's about parenting. And it's about who actually is going to do what Michelle did and scour the internet when everybody else has just said, sorry, we can't help you anymore. So the people who love their kids the most need to be the kids in charge of what their health and educational decisions are, and they need to be notified, and that is not abuse, that is love. So I would also guide you to, I know that was a lot of information, there's an article that I wrote today based on all the time that I spent documenting her case that's in the Federalist. I would direct you just to that. It's an article about Sage and about what happened to her. So I know it was a lot to take in, but that puts everything on the record in a format that's probably easier.